back in 2018, I was cutting hair. That's what I did for a living, and was cutting hair at the salon. And one of my longtime clients came in for a haircut, and she sat down in my chair, and I started combing through her hair and said, "Hey, what are we doing with your hair today?" And I'll never forget what she said. She said, "John, I don't need a haircut. I just need someone to listen to me." And I remember when she said that, it like stopped me dead in my tracks. For one, I'd never heard that before. And I remember feeling like a real deep sadness of like, she was going to come in to see me for a haircut, have me give her a haircut that she didn't really need, but she was going to pay me just so she would have somebody to listen to her. And I remember from that moment on, I was like, hey, there's something here. Like there's something about listening that is not only really powerful, but it feels like it's really needed right now in our society. And this was back before COVID broke out, but a lot of the studies that were done back in 2019 before COVID and the pandemic had diagnosed America as being in an epidemic of loneliness.
Yep.
And people were lonelier in 2019 than they ever had been in the history of our country. And for the first time, young people, Gen Z at the time, were lonelier than the elderly. And I just remember hearing that at the salon. Then I started to hear more and more instances. And then in 2019, there's this study that says we're in an epidemic of loneliness. And then I was still cutting hair at the salon. And so I'm hearing this more and more. And I even remember one of my clients shortly after came in, different client, and said, we're talking, I'm cutting hair. And my client said, hey, you know what? I pay a therapist $150 an hour because no one will listen to me, not even my spouse. And I just, there kept being like this recurring theme of people don't have anyone to listen to them. Mm-hmm. And when people feel heard and when people feel like you are listening, they feel loved. You know, like people feel loved, they feel known and all of that. And so that was the first moment was back in 2018. And I was like, man, there's something really powerful about listening.
So how were you approaching your interactions at the salon before? Like what was your mindset with, because you're obviously probably still having conversations with them, right?
Yeah. I think my mindset before, I cut hair for years before this. Mm-hmm. And it was like, hey, the only reason why someone's coming into the salon is to get a haircut.
Yep.
And you kind of provide a little bit of chit chat to make the time go by, you know? So it's like, you don't want to have an awkward, like silent period while you're giving a haircut. But the baseline assumption for me was someone's going to come in and give me business and pay me to give them the service of cutting their actual hair. Mm-hmm. And the approach then shifted of, hey, there's actually another service that I'm offering that is very valuable to people. And when my client voiced that of like, hey, I'm just coming in because I need you to listen to me, I was like, man, there's something here. And it actually made me view my work at the salon differently.
Sure.
And I started to view it, and there's the age old, like the salon's the place where gossip happens because people tell their hairdresser, or like my hairdresser's my therapist. I tell them everything. So there's always like a understanding that people talk to their barber or hairdresser, but it had still never hit me on the importance and the value and the need that so many people, unlike me, because I didn't feel this way at the time, so many people feel I don't have anybody in my life to listen to me. Mm-hmm. And that's like, it's a tragic thing.
Mm-hmm. So from a leadership perspective, because you worked at a salon, and then I think you owned, you own a salon? Yeah. And then you also were bivocational and then went into full-time ministry. So
crazy story, right?
Yeah. I mean, insane, right? So how have you seen, or how has that tool for listening been applied in the one-on-one sense with your clients at the hair salon versus as you kind of grew in maybe influence and just the amount of people you were interacting with in ministry? Yeah. Is there a difference in the way you were applying it, or is it like a principle that you say would just carry across the board?
You know what? It has been something that I've learned about and have actively tried to grow in. And I would say because of that, I would say it's just applied across the board. And I think what I have come to realize is why listening is so powerful is because every single person has a story, and every person longs to be known. And so what listening provides is it provides a space for people's stories to actually be understood and listened to. And all of our stories are very different and have shaped us. And so by me listening to you, I'm actually hearing a bit of, hey, here's the things that have happened in Ben's life. And this is how you've come to think or act or believe or whatever it is in the way that you have. And in my action of actively trying to listen to you, you feel known. And so I think it's carried across into leadership, because when you're able to listen, you can better understand people. You're able to actually feel a sense of empathy and compassion instead of believing the worst about someone, because that's what we typically do. Is when we're given the least amount of information, people will automatically always connect the dots in the most pathological ways possible, which means we're prone to believing the worst. And when you ask questions and listen, all of a sudden now you fill in the gaps, and I don't have the least amount of information. Now I actually have the appropriate amount of information. And so I can better understand the people that I'm leading, the people that I'm pastoring. And I feel a sense of like deep empathy and even compassion for people to help them. And so it's been really helpful. And so I would say it's just carried over, but it's looked differently, I think, from the salon to a church setting.
Yeah. How does that fit into, because I feel like one of the things you're speaking into is like trust, even in a relationship. Like your listening establishes trust.
Totally.
How does that fit into the way that we interact today in our own culture? And just some of maybe the unique dynamics of social media, everything's digital. Versus, like how do you listen in a world that is so noise heavy?
Man, the world we live in we're surrounded by noise all the time, where everyone is talking, but very few people are listening. And everybody's got opinions, everybody's posting stuff, everybody's commenting, everybody is putting out content, and so there's not a shortage of people talking, but there's a shortage of people listening. And so I think you're exactly right on the trust piece. When you listen to someone because they feel known, because they feel heard, which is what they're longing for, you will grow their trust. And I forget who said it. It's another one of those things where it's like, I don't know who said it, who gets the credit, but it's the age old, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And when you listen to someone, it shows that you genuinely are interested in them, and that you're not just talking at them, or you're not just going to assume things about them, but you're seeking to understand, hey, help me understand fill in the blank. Tell me what that's like for you. Tell me about your family or where you grew up. Like there's just a genuine interest. And what that does is it grows people's trust, and they view you as, hey, you genuinely care about me. And so I think there's a lot of ways that you can cultivate listening and growing. I think, though, the big thing is just to name the fact that we are in a listening deficit in our society. We listen to content, and we listen to content creators and influencers and things like that. But when it comes to just people, there's a whole lot of talking, and there's not an actual embodied listening with people. And it's really powerful.
Yeah. Do you have any examples of whether it's as a pastor or at the salon, that really, as you began to practice it, really showed how valuable it was?
I think a huge one. Actually, this is a great one, because this was where I saw the power of listening for peacemaking and conflict resolution. Back in 2020, obviously tensions were heightened. The world there was a lot of uncertainty and a lot of conflict, a lot of division, a lot of polarization, and all of that. And so it actually happened within our church community that something was said in a communication from one of our pastors. And based on what was said, it was addressing some of the current political tension in 2020, because everything was heightened around race and justice and COVID and masking and vaccinations. Like everything was just like,
if you wanted a reason to be upset, there was one you could find for sure.
Yeah. Like people are going to get upset. And so he did not make any kind of statement or a position, but he addressed something pertaining to the political division. And it had to do with race, like the race and justice conversation. Well, a guy in our congregation got really angry. He was a member at our church, a leader, and he emailed me. And I wasn't the one that said it. It was one of our other leaders. And he emailed me and said, "Hey, I can't believe that this was said. Like, I am so upset by this that I'm leaving the church. I'm no longer going to be a member here, and I'm leaving." And I was like, whoa. I'd met with this guy a lot, and he was a leader. And so it was just like, whoa, I think there's a misunderstanding here, because he had explained what he had thought he heard. And so in my response to him, I was like, "Hey, thanks so much for emailing me. I'm so sorry to hear this. Hey, can we get together? Like, would you meet with me?" And he emailed back and he agreed to it. So we met, and I knew going in, this guy's already upset. So there's already a degree of conflict happening. And I don't really know how he's going to show up to the meeting, if I'm going to get yelled at, if he's going to fly off the handle or what. And so I just, prayed and felt like the right thing to do was, I'm just going to ask him a lot of questions, and I'm just going to take the posture of listening. And it was so interesting. We met in person and we were socially distanced, because this is like peak of the pandemic, right? So we were socially distanced. So he's like sitting like 20 feet away from me, And, but I remember just asking him a series of questions. And I didn't seek to like defend myself. It was genuinely, I was trying to understand, like, hey, what about this was so upsetting? Like, help me understand. Linked it back to like his story. Man, I will never forget. This is another one of those where I was like convinced about the power of listening. This guy came in just like visibly angry, tense, like body posture, nonverbal communication is like, this guy like wants to throw down, and he was so upset. And man, I just start asking just some questions, and he starts talking, and it just like his posture within 5 minutes, dude, changes. No longer crossed arms, like visibly relaxes. He starts leaning back, because he was like real rigid, and his whole posture changed. And we then end up meeting for about an hour and a half. And I just keep asking him questions. He starts telling me a story of back when he was in college. And this guy's an older guy. Back when he was in college, well, the very thing that he was upset about, a comment about the political division, well, something had happened in his life at college pertaining to the topic of race and politics. I had no idea. Just by listening to him, and because I was asking him, I was like, "Hey, what about this was so upsetting? It seems like this was really upsetting." And then he starts to go into his whole story, and we're talking like 30 years ago. And so then I just asked him, I said, "Hey, it sounds like this was like deeply impactful in your life. Do you think like maybe this is connected to why you're feeling so upset?" And man, he hadn't made that connection. And in the meeting, he makes the connection. And he's like, "Yeah, you want to know it?" And so then I walked back after I listened to him for about an hour. I walked back and said, "Hey, this is what was said. Like, it seems like you thought you heard this, but like, can we go back and like listen to it?" And then it was like, oh, it was clearly not. This guy ended up not only changing his whole posture, he ended up apologizing.
Wow.
And then he was so mad that he ended up apologizing to the leader who he was so upset, who said this. And he ended up apologizing to the leader, and he stayed at the church. He didn't leave the church. And you just go, man, I didn't argue him. I didn't try to convince him otherwise. I just asked him a bunch of questions. And then he made this connection of like 30 years ago, something that happened in college that he had deep pain and baggage for was connected to this. And this actually wasn't about what the leader at the church said. It was actually about all of the stuff in the past. And there was conflict resolution. Like it led to really high tension. And just listening was a means of peacemaking.
Yeah.
And so that's like one that I think of like, man, it was just so powerful because you could visibly see him just like relax.
Yeah.
Of like, oh, I thought, because I'm sure he was thinking I was going to go at him and like, hey, you're wrong, you know?
Yeah.
Because that's what happened to him in college.
Hmm.
And then you just go, no, I'm just like, man, I care about you and I want to hear, and just totally changed.
How do you balance? Because I think the church is a really interesting study on this because the pulpit is a stage where it leans heavily on the assertive side, right? Pastor's not getting up and like asking questions from the congregation in the moment.
Yeah.
So like they're preaching, they're proclaiming the word of God, they're being assertive in what they're saying.
Yeah.
And then like balancing that with the act of listening and the practice of listening. Like in this conversation, it sounds like you navigated both listening and assertiveness. Can you speak into that a little bit?
Dude, that's a great question. I think for me, and different people could go about this differently. For me, I think what I have learned to be most beneficial in my context is to lead with listening. And then when there's an opportunity to maybe be assertive or to say what needs to be said, to do it. Mm-hmm. But you are coming, once again, it's the whole like people don't care how much you know till they know how much you care.
Yeah.
And then if it's like, hey, you feel cared for, I listened, I came in with a genuine posture, not an agenda just to like bait and switch you, but a genuine posture of like, hey, I care about you.
Yeah.
And you've got a story and help me understand. And then there usually is always an opportunity to say what needs to be said. Mm-hmm. But you're doing it out of a place of being well-informed, of instead of just saying the thing from listening, man, I feel empathy for this person. Mm-hmm. Like your story is not my story.
Yeah.
And I could actually see, like, I don't see it how you see it, but I can understand how you got there, And so I think for me, I have learned to lead with listening and ask a lot of questions to then also help me better formulate how I'm going to communicate something that might need to be communicated.
Yeah.
Because there are, like, you can't just always only listen to people.
Right.
Like you need to, especially in leadership, there's things that need to be said. People need to be challenged. Mm-hmm. You don't just accept every crazy thing that's ever said as like, oh yeah, that's totally fine. Like sometimes you need to correct people out of love, or just say, hey, this is the thing that needs to be said. And this is just what you need to know. And so that there is a how you navigate that, and I think it would be different in different contexts.
Right.
So like I'm a pastor, and it may be different in the marketplace if you're leading a company or something like that. But I do feel like the thing that isn't different is listening is so powerful.
Yeah,
and people will feel loved by you and cared for by you and known, and therefore they are in a better posture and position themselves to receive whatever you have to say.
Sure. I would argue in the marketplace, I'd say it's more similar than it is different, right? Even from a pastoral to the marketplace. I mean, regardless, like you're a leader, you're interacting with people with backgrounds, histories, experience, traumas, stresses in their own lives. And like listening gives you the ability to step into their shoes, understand as much as you can what's going on in the background. So yeah, I would say there's more similarities than there are differences.
It makes sense. It makes a lot of sense that there would be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What would you say to someone who maybe they say like, I wish I was surrounded by more listeners, or maybe they feel like they're always the one that's listening and they feel maybe, I don't know, burdened by that.
If you are a leader, you will necessarily take on the greater burden. But it's also important that you have someone to listen to you. And so I think, you've got to figure out who that is, close friends, people that care for you, other leaders that you feel relationally like you trust. But in leadership, I think that's part of the burden and the weight of leadership is you should be listening to the people you're leading more than they should be seeking you out to listen to you. Now, honestly, when you are giving a directive, they have to listen to you, right? Because like you're their boss or whatever. But as far as if you're wanting just someone to listen to you all the time, you're probably not going to get that. Mm-hmm. But you need it for your own sake as being a healthy leader to be able to process things. Like leadership is lonely, and it's hard, and so you need healthy outlets. For some, they find that in therapy. For others, they find that in like covenant friendships where it's like people that really love you, trust you. For others, it is like, if you're a marketplace leader, it's your pastors, things like that. You need it though. But I would just say like that's part of the burden that you take on of the weight of leadership is saying, that should be actually a normal thing.
Dive in a little bit more onto like, how do you lead through listening? Like where does that actually come into play?
I think you could throw out like a lot of scenarios. The biggest one would be, leading through change is a really helpful one of being able to listen to people and hear where they're at before making a decision is really helpful. Or if a decision had already been made because of the organization structure and the team that made the decision, then it's listening to people on how they might have concerns about a decision and how it's going to affect them. So I think that could be one. A big one is we all know that conflict is a part of leadership. Conflict's not bad, but it's what you do with conflict, that it can be really bad or it can actually strengthen a team and relationship, and it can be a source of growth. And so listening is actually a means of, and I shared this with that story, but resolving conflict.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of conflict on teams. And so once again, I think it's when you listen, you are being well-informed instead of believing the worst. And so I think it also provides then team camaraderie and cohesion because people feel known. And so I think there is a degree of how it affects the team where when people feel like, hey, Ben's a really good listener. And I know if I have something going on in my life, like he's going to listen to me. And I also know that I'm not just like a cog in the wheel, but he actually cares about me. And so what I have seen is listening is also, when it comes to efficiency, it seems like listening is really inefficient.
Yeah.
It's actually, I would argue, the most efficient way to lead is with the ear. Because a lot of inefficiencies is from unknown, unmet expectations. And so by listening, you actually save yourself a lot of the downstream work.
Yeah.
And so I actually think it's more efficient as well. Efficiency in organizations, right? Because like sometimes in church, like the church world, it can be different. And it's like, oh yeah, of course, like you're a pastor, you just listen to people all the time. But when it's organizations and efficiency, the more efficient thing in listening and what oftentimes happens is you end up spending a lot of time on unmet or misaligned expectations, a lot of time on conflict, and it ends up being really, really inefficient. And so if you just do like the math, it might take you a couple hours to listen to some people, but if you don't do that on the front end, the downstream, you might have 20, 30, 40 hours of conflict of whatever it may be that you're trying to sort out. And then I just think it's good for overall retention.
Yeah.
Like people want to work for a leader that they feel like actually is interested in their life, that has actually sought to understand them and their story and what they care about and what their hopes are and what their dreams are and what their fears are, all of that. It's like, man, if this is like innate in every human being, like we long to be known, and you work for a leader or an organization where like that's present, that's invaluable.
Yeah.
And so I also think it's like, it's a retention thing too. And so I think there's a lot of ways that it plays out. Yeah. Those are some off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Obviously in like more counseling and care, that's a more natural one. That's why I didn't go there. But these are some where I would say in teams, in organizations, like where it I think is really beneficial.
Yeah. I really like that you touched on efficiency, because I think oftentimes, especially from a leadership perspective, the nature is to like put your head down and just push through.
Dude, totally.
And just having the wherewithal to stop, like lift your head up and ask questions to the people around you about where they're at, like what are their hopes, what are their fears?
Yeah.
How do they see themselves fitting into the organization or the plan or project or agenda that you have? You'd probably save yourself a lot of heartache.
Yeah.
How would you define effective listening?
One of the things that I would say is you've got the difference between hearing and listening. So hearing is something that simply just happens. It's one of your five senses, right? Like we are hearing each other right now, or you're hearing a plane outside. But listening is something different. Like both of them use your ears, but listening is where you make the choice to try to actively understand what you've heard. And so what I would say effective listening, if I were to define it, is where you are, another way is I would just say it's actively listening, right? And there's ways that you can actively listen to people. But I would say effective listening is where you are actively engaged and you are dialed into the person. You are not just hearing them where it goes. We've all had that, like, yeah, I totally heard my teacher give the homework, but I did not listen and I don't know how to do it now, Yeah. And we all know that feeling where it's like, I totally heard, but I didn't listen. But I'm like, not just hearing you, I'm listening with the intent to try to understand. And so when I would say effective listening is that it's interpersonally and it's organizationally. I don't think it's just always one-on-one, but I think it's where you're actively trying to understand the people you're leading or even your customers, right? That there's a listening to. Now, did I just want to like hear some feedback from our clients, or did I really want to actively listen to say like, hey, I want to understand this because we actually may want to like implement some stuff. Effective listening. One of the things that I always say is a good listening or effective listening to your question always starts with the question of how can I make this conversation about the other person? And so if you are going as a leader, like, hey, this conversation isn't about me, but how can I make this conversation about you, Ben? And so I am showing up with the intent to listen. And to try to understand. And that's not with an agenda attached to it, but it's really just to say, hey, I'm not going to make this conversation about me. It's actually about you. And so I know going into it that I'm going to do more listening than speaking.
Yeah.
And so I think that effective listening is just that.
Servant leadership.
Servant leadership.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which honestly, if you look at who is the pinnacle of servant leadership that everybody looks at, is Jesus, right? Like that's where servant leadership comes from, is his ministry. And Jesus asks over 300 questions in the Gospels. And it's like, well, depending on who you believe Jesus is, you and I are Christians, and so we believe he's God. And if Jesus is God, well, he already knows the answer. So why is he asking all these questions? Well, he's doing it out of a means of loving and caring for the people on the other side. That he's giving them the opportunity to be heard, to be known, to be loved. He doesn't need to ask them. He already knows, and there's examples of that in the Gospels where Jesus already knows their story. He knows your name before, all of that. And yet he's doing something because listening is a means of love. And so I think, it's servant leadership. Like this is an innate desire that every single person has. And so when you go, hey, I'm not going to make this conversation about me, you're serving people and you're leading out of a heart of a servant to care for the people you're leading.
What would you say is the biggest blocker for people in like listening well?
One is we get distracted really easily. I think a part of actively listening and effective is to not be looking at your phone or, you get a text and looking at every single text message, And so one of the practices that I learned from someone was either put your phone away where it's not in view, or you flip it over if it's got to be out, emergency type thing, like flip it over so your screen, you're not always getting the notifications, but it's hard to be actively engaged and listening if you're checking text messages. Somebody's talking to you and you're looking down at your phone, looking at text or responding to a text. Clearly you're not actively listening to the person and texting someone, So I think that's like a really practical one. Another thing that makes it hard besides distraction is a lot of times people don't know how to ask good questions. The worst kind of question you can ask someone is a why question. So you may wonder why, right? The reason for that is when you ask someone a why question, it immediately puts them on the defensive. So a lot of times people don't really know how to ask like good open-ended questions. So it's just like, hey, you know, did you like that? And it's like, well, that's a closed-ended question. That's a yes or no.
Yep.
But how do you have good questions, and how do you not just go, well, why do you think that way? You know, if you tell me that the tacos that we're going to eat later are the best tacos, and I'm like a taco skeptic, and I'm like, well, why? Why would you say that? You know, like, I think this place has the best tacos. You're automatically going to go on the defensive, and you're going to have to try to like prove your case of like, these tacos are the best. But if I just say like, hey, what makes you think that they're the best tacos?
Yeah.
Well, you're like, man, dude, it's like the salsa, you know, and you just start to then explain it instead of like, oh, I got to defend myself.
Yeah.
Or, hey, how many other taco places have you been to in the city? You know, and it's like, oh, well, 2. Okay, so it's like the best of 2. But if you're like, dude, I'm a taco connoisseur and I've been to 300 taco spots, this is the best out of 300. Well, it's different than just like the why.
Right.
That's a trivial example. But if you start to go in like an organizational setting where there's like some complexities and maybe high emotion, and you enter in with the why question of like, well, why do you feel that? Why are you offended? You know, it's just like, dude, you get the worst of people.
Yeah.
Because they feel like, oh, something's wrong with me. And now I got to defend myself.
Yeah.
So I would say asking good questions is hard. A lot of times people don't know what good questions are. They resort to, and we all do it, is a why question, but that's not actually a great question. Something that I always love to do is I have 2 or 3, what I would say is like really good questions that I always have in like my back pocket or like up my sleeve. These are like my go-tos. So, you know, sometimes they're just going to talk. But if you're wondering like, man, how can I really get maybe some depth and to get a deeper understanding? So I'll give you 2 of mine. So you can take these if you want. So one of my favorites is, tell me about a time in your life when, fill in the blank. Now you can go like fun with it, but you can go deep. Yeah. You know, tell me about a time in your life when you felt seen by your dad. It's like, dude, you're going to get into some deep stuff. All of a sudden you realize like, oh, this person didn't have a dad. Yeah. You know, or hey, like, tell me about a time in your life that you went to a theme park and you like loved a ride. You know, like you can go however, but like just tell me about a time in your life when, and you can fill in the blank for whatever you're curious about. Sure. Dude, that one is like gold. It's so good. Yeah. That question. And then this is my favorite question to ask is, what has that been like for you? And that question seeks to genuinely understand someone else's story and lived experience. And that will make someone feel like, man, you're really trying to understand like, hey, I don't know what it was like I'm born and raised in Arizona. Like, I don't know what it was like to live in Canada. Like, tell me what that was like for you to like, or, hey, you have dual citizenship. Tell me what that was like. Or you go really deep into it, or like, hey, somebody, you know, they're talking about a previous employer experience and something gnarly happened. And it's like, hey, tell me what it was like for you when that happened to you at your last, you know? And so that is, those 2 questions are really helpful. Yeah. There's other ones too, but those are like 2 of my favorites.
No, that's good. That second one's like the ultimate open-ended question, because it is 100% through their eyes and their lived experience and their emotions. And I mean, I would imagine you will never, ever, ever get the same answer to that question from different people, or maybe even from the same person, depending on what you're touching on. Yeah,
you probably won't. And what you probably will get are a lot of tears a lot of times. And that's one of the reasons why I love that question so much is it connects so deeply emotionally with people. The number of people who have cried when I've asked them that question, men and women. Yeah. That just like break. Because once again, you can apply that to anything. You know, it's like, hey, tell me what it was like when, you know, a really hard thing. Like, you know, one of your coworkers, man, their brother was killed. Yeah. You know, it's like, man, tell me what that was like for you when you're going through that, you know, after your brother died, you know, and it's like, dude, you're going to get tears, you know, or whatever it is.
Do you have any other, like, maybe someone wants to formulate their own questions, or any other practical like tools people can use if they want to start listening better?
One is to write like 2 to 3 open-ended good questions. Like, and if you If you want to take those ones and like use them, use them. But if you want to modify them to give you some kind of like question template, have 2 to 3 go-to questions. And the reason why I recommend that is sometimes it's hard to think of really good questions. Like, oh, I got a book of like 50 questions. That's hard. But if you have some open-ended ones like this that you can apply to like any conversation or situation, those will just work. And so then you don't have to overly think about it. The other one is if you want to practically grow as a listener, spend time around a really good listener. I've said this before and even on another podcast episode, but it's just true, is if you are trying to learn, the best way to learn some of this stuff isn't to be taught it, it's to see it modeled in real life and to experience it. When you have been on the receiving end of someone asking you really good questions and listening to you, you're like, man, I want to learn from that person. And more things are caught than taught. And so I could teach you how to grow as a listener, but when you spend time around a really good listener, it'll rub off on you and you see it actually made visible. It's not just some concept in a book or on a podcast, but like, man, that's amazing, you know? And so I would say try to spend time around someone that's a really good listener and see what they do, you know, because they'll probably do some stuff maybe similar to what I'm saying, but they might do some stuff different that might actually be even better and more helpful. I have it as a goal, like a practice of when I was really trying to grow in listening, of the 80-20 rule. So what I do and what I did several years ago is to go into conversations to say, hey, I am going to listen 80% of the time and only speak 20% of the time. And that 20% will probably be when I'm asked, like, hey, what do you think about that? Or what about you? And then I'll speak. Like, I'm not going to refrain and be silent, but to say, hey, 80% of this meeting that I'm about to have, I want it to be the other person talking. And so that's like a really helpful, just to make it a discipline, to think about it. And it doesn't have to be 80-20, but in a percentage to say, hey, the goal of this meeting, if I'm meeting with this person for, 2 hours, you do the math of 80% of that time, you should be asking questions and seeking to understand, and then you'll speak. So those are some that have just been like helpful for me. I think the big one is just having some good questions to ask, having the posture of actively listening, not being on your phone, not being distracted, but to say like, hey, I'm present with you. And then I think it's just helpful if you see it modeled so that you are able to say like, oh, there's different ways that you can do this, especially in different contexts. So those would be some of the ones that I think have been helpful for me that I think have helped other people as well.
Sure. What would you say to someone who maybe they're in the marketplace, they have a job, their relationships at work feel more transactional and maybe hurried. Like how could someone, because you're obviously not going to just step into someone's office and go like, tell me your deepest, darkest secrets, or like, how do you bridge that gap and maybe start to take steps relationally with people around you who you haven't even ventured into this area with?
Dude, that's a great question. Obviously it depends on like the organization and the structure of size and teams and all of that. But I would say start with whoever you are closest to in the organization. So if it's a peer, start there. Start with a peer. Maybe it's not someone that's a direct report, but maybe it's your peer. Start there. And maybe it's been kind of a transactional, like you and I are peers and it's kind of been transactional, but say, hey, dude, we're peers. I'd love to like, man, can we grab lunch sometime? I'd love to just get to know you more and I would even name it like, hey, sometimes I feel like this peer-to-peer is kind of transactional, but like, man, it'd be cool. We're rubbing shoulders. We're working towards the same goal. Like, let's connect.
Yeah.
And I would start there. And I think it's like everything. If you're trying to grow as a listener, I would start somewhere and grow. Like, don't be like, hey, I'm going to listen to every single employee. And that's also maybe just impractical for the organization. And even for me, like as a pastor of the size of the church, I don't meet with every single person in the church. The hope is that everybody on our staff is connecting with, people in the church, but it's just, there's too many people in the church for just me. And honestly, even on our staff, like our staff is so big that we have to have obviously different people who are listening to their direct reports on staff. And so I would say start somewhere small. Start maybe with a peer, start with somebody that maybe you're most comfortable with, because it can be a little intimidating, especially if this changes like the MO for how you navigate. And then I think you'll see the fruit of it. I have never talked to someone that began practicing listening that said it was unfruitful or a waste. Everybody sees the benefit in it. It can be awkward at first, especially if it's like, oh, this is new, you know? But people see the fruit of it because it's how humans are wired.
Yeah.
And so people will respond in a different way, and they will receive your leadership in a different way. So I'd start somewhere small.
Yeah. What would you say are the biggest primary benefits of listening well, whether that's from a leadership perspective or just relationally one-on-one?
A big benefit is that you will better understand the people that you're leading. Like that's just like from like baseline, the biggest benefit is you will begin to not assume the worst and believe the worst about people. And we're all prone to do that. But that's when we're given the least amount of information and we make assumptions about people. And so for you as a leader, you will be able to enter in to someone's life in a different way. And you'll see even if you don't agree with it, you'll see how they're getting to where they're getting. And there's a power in proximity. And proximity breeds empathy. And that's where, you know, talking about like feeling for someone of like, dang, that's your story. I had no idea. I didn't know that happened to you. Proximity breeds empathy, but distance breeds suspicion. And when you don't have, and you don't even have, like, we could still be like this across the table on a team, but still have distance. Like, I don't know you, you don't know me, we don't, you know. And what that does is it breeds suspicion. And so some of what this really does is it actually makes a team much closer and more cohesive. And that's somewhere where the retention comes in, is that you can actually create a culture in your organization or your place of employment through listening, a culture of listening. And it's honestly, the way that it's felt is a humble leadership culture. It's like, hey, the leaders are actually seeking to hear from me. They're not just coming in, you know, heavy-handed, telling me what I need to do or telling me what I don't know or telling me this, but they actually care about me, and it's going to be received as humility. And so I think that's a big benefit. I think you have another one outside of the conflict resolution stuff. I think that's a huge benefit where I've seen it play out the most from my own vantage point and experience. The biggest benefit is the conflict resolution. So much conflict is from unmet expectations or misaligned expectations. And it's just a lack of listening and communicating. And people just misunderstand each other, you know? And so I think that that's a huge benefit. One that we haven't hit though is in most businesses, and I know even in the church, we want to develop leaders. We want more leaders. We want the next generation of leaders. We want more, you know, like more teams, you know, people who have an ownership mentality for what we're doing. And man, when you seek to listen and understand people, it actually can provide a pool of potential future leaders. And so it's just a great way to actually get to know the people that you're working with and are working under you. And so I think the retention is a benefit of that. But the leadership development piece is huge to say like, man, I've been connecting with Ben, and this guy's great. Like he's a leader, you know, we got to figure out some environments or pathways for him, you know, and like what might that look like? But that only happens by doing this.
Yeah.
You know,
that makes me think of like any mentorship type relationships I've ever had. And it's hilarious because you go to a mentor and you think, oh, they're just going to like pour into me and give me all this information,
totally,
all this wisdom.
Dude.
Most of the time, like 90% of a mentor relationship is like me asking them them asking me a bunch of questions and me just like word vomiting and sharing about my life. And then the kind of like, you know, there is some guidance and things involved in that, but it often is more them asking questions than anything else. And then that creating clarity and guidance for like the way that I want to grow, the way I want to develop as a leader. It kind of flips the expectation on its head.
Dude, I love what you just said about mentors, because typically a mentor is viewed as someone that's wise. And I have never met a wise person that wasn't a really good listener. Like it's almost synonymous. You know, like there's something about wisdom of like, hey, I want to listen. And even like in scripture, in the Bible, you know, something that has been really helpful for me is in James 1, And I think it's 19 through 21. But be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because the anger of man doesn't produce the righteousness of God. To translate that into just non-biblical languages, hey, don't be quick to speak, because it actually leads to anger. And when you're quick to anger, it's the worst of you is going to come out. Be quick to listen instead. And that's why I think so many wise people embody this. Like in James, it's wisdom literature, and it's showing you this is how wise people live, is be quick to listen. But so often, like even in my own life, I used to talk all the time, talk over people. Like my meetings were always like, I'm telling everybody and I'm dominating. And yet also, like when you're quick to speak, you're also going to be quick to become angry. And that's not going to produce good things.
Yeah.
It's going to create chaos and conflict and all of that. But listening is actually a really, really powerful means of embodying wisdom in people's lives.
Yeah. How do listening and control interact?
Dude, that's a great question, man. Listening and control. When you listen, you are actually not seeking to be in control. You actually give someone else the feeling of being in control based on you're asking them to answer your questions and genuine curiosity. And so I think you are giving up control in that, which is why I think you're serving someone. But I think the fruit of it, the benefit of being a listening leader or just listening in life, is you don't have to force control. You don't have to try to take control, because people feel loved and cared for by you. They want to submit to your leadership and follow you. And so it leads you to being able to actually lead. And I don't think you have to grasp for control or try to like dominate and implement, like I'm going to control, because people will respect you.
Yeah.
And I think that when leaders aren't respected, a lot of times they oftentimes have to make the case for this is why you need to follow me, and
Yeah.
And so I think it's actually like the byproduct of this is you don't have to like fight for it or vie for it or force it. Yeah, that's what I say off the cuff.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it just speaks back into that idea of servant leadership, like
Totally.
Relational investment, right? Building trust within both the people that follow you and peer to peer as well, right?
Yeah. I think going back to the beginning is like on the epidemic of loneliness, there's even now, like I would make the case, there's now more of a need for it than in 2019. So if you just play out what happened with COVID, social distance, isolation, everything post-COVID.
Virtual work. Yeah.
Yep. Virtual work, more and more digitization of, now we're in the age of AI. And now people are actually forming relationships with bots.
Yep.
People are talking to bots. And there's all kinds of different bots, not just romantic ones, but there's therapeutic bots.
Yep.
Like you can have a chat bot for your therapy. And like all this is just showing us people are like craving this. And people that we work with are craving it. And I even had a conversation with a guy, and he's not like a strange guy. I was actually pretty surprised to hear him say it, because he's not a socially awkward guy or anything like that. But he said that he's realized that the person he has now started to talk with the most is ChatGPT. Like he's formed like a dialogue, like a relationship with ChatGPT. And you just go, man, like people are longing to be listened to. And if we were in an epidemic of loneliness in 2019 before COVID, before OpenAI, before all of the things, and you just see like we are still in a mental health epidemic, the use and need of therapists is greater now than ever has been. And so this isn't even among like old people or our age. Like this is the next generation as well. This is Gen Z and even younger than Gen Z that are like, man, people are lonely. And so I think that's just like something to be said, because I didn't close the loop on that. Like this wasn't just a 2019 problem. Yeah. But it's actually gotten worse.
Yep.
And so I think that a lot of people that we are, whether we're leading them, whether we're working with them, whether they're our clients, like my clients at the salon, people are like longing for this, but feel like, you can't be really listened to on social media or online. And so, I think there's a huge opportunity to lead in listening.
Well, and I think like our like relationships have become increasingly more transactional.
Yeah.
As you know, we've moved into the digital age and technology and efficiencies. And so like what I've even caught myself doing is like there are moments where maybe I need advice in a certain area, or I need connections, or whatever it is, right? Just like trying to understand or grasp a specific topic. It could be finances, it could be working on my car,
Totally.
or like whatever. And in a previous day and age, you would reach out to community, you'd reach out to friends.
Yeah.
You might reach out to even a professional. So it is a transactional relationship, but it's still a transactional relationship with a human being.
Yep.
And as this continues to grow and become more and more part of our society, it will continue to be more and more transactional.
Dude,
and
totally.
I'm interested to see, because I think, that loneliness culturally is really going to increase.
Yep.
And also with that, like the need for deep relationships is also going to increase. And I mean, listening it just seems like such a powerful way to break the ice on that. Yeah,
man, I agree.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you want to say on this subject that you haven't gotten to?
No, I think like the motivation, even for me, is obviously I'm a pastor and a Christian, but I think that this is not just all of the need that we're naming of like our societal moment and our cultural moment, but for me, this is God's posture towards us. And so in Psalm 116, it says that God bends down and inclines his ear, or he bends down and he listens. He inclines his ear to us and he listens to us. And so I think just a huge thing is like, hey, this is not just within our culture and the moment we're in. This is a human desire. And this is actually how God acts towards us, is that he bends down and listens. And so we have a really powerful opportunity to embody the listening presence of God to others. And so that's part of the reason why I believe it's so powerful in people's lives.
In closing, if there was one step that someone could take to start to develop this skill, whether it's a resource, a place to go, an action they can take, what would you say is a good first step?
I would say the best thing is to examine yourself to see if you have a genuine desire to grow in listening, because you have to want it. If you don't want to grow as a listener, you never will. So I would say step one is, do you want to actually become a better listener? And if you do, then I would say the next step is come up with those like 2 to 3 good questions that you can start to ask people and see the benefit, because it'll all be like ethereal and conceptual until you actually do it and see like, oh, this was powerful. And then I think you'll be convinced of it. And then, there's a lot of other resources. So that's what I would say. Yeah. It's like, you got to want it. And if so, come up with like 2 to 3 good questions. Use the ones that I gave, even if you don't know how to formulate those, and start like choose a person and say like, I want to try to like get to know them better, listen, understand them, all of that. So,
well, yeah, John, I really appreciate this conversation. I know that, this is an area that you're passionate about. You've developed, you're a practitioner of, and I know I even have like personally benefited from you developing this, and just our interactions and the way that you lead. So this was great. Thank you.
Yeah, man. Thanks, dude. This was fun.
Yep.
Hey, y'all, thanks so much for watching. If you want more content like this, we've got some killer stuff planned. So make sure you rate, review, and subscribe. Let's go, let's go, let's go.